Hello and welcome. I'm Colin Hambrook, editor of Disability Arts Online. I'm an older white man wearing glasses and a purple shirt sitting in my home office. For the final event in our current series of artist presentations, 5 international artists have been collaborating over the internet, sharing thoughts, ideas and responding to each other's arts practice. Visual and performance artist Rachel Gadsden, composer Freddie Meyers and violinist Emily Earl, all from the UK, performance artist Yeung Siu-Fong from Hong Kong, and visual artist Jeremy Hawkes from Australia have been working together to reflect upon the physical and psychological issues of displacement, pandemics, immunology and hope. The artists present a 30-minute film, Deluge, as a work in progress using drawing, painting, animation and live art sound performance in an artistic response to the current crisis. They talk to camera interspersed with elements of the artwork they've been creating. Join Rachel and myself for a live Q&A after the presentation and send your questions via the Facebook or YouTube comments sections or the hashtag #DAOCOVIDCommissions.
My name's Rachel Gadsden and I'm a visual and performance artist. I'm a white woman of very average height and with short hair. I'm speaking to you today from my studio in London. It's quite a small studio, about 4 meters maybe by 3 meters, but that's where I am today, and I've got some of my drawings up around me, behind me on the walls of my studio. I'm really pleased today to be introducing you to a new performance piece that I'm creating as part of a COVID-19 award I received from Disability Arts Online. When I set about to try and make an application to DAO, I wasn't entirely sure where this piece would ultimately go. And what I'm going to be sharing with you today with my artistic collaborators is a sense of what we've been trying to do during this very strange year of pandemia and understanding new notions of being isolated. The piece is entitled Deluge, and it sort of sums up in one word exactly the emotions and the feelings that we've all been going through as we try to come to terms with our new, very different existence. I often work with different collaborators. I'm primarily a visual and performance artist. I'm disabled and I'm visually impaired. And despite my sight limitations, I've continued to always work as a visual artist. But over the last 20 or so years, I've become acutely conscious that whenever I create or make any mark on a canvas or on paper, I also hear very clear sounds within my head. And it's always been my wish to try and find a form of expressing that in some way, because it's very much part of what I experience when I'm making work. So for that reason, I've collaborated and teamed up with Freddie Meyers, who's a composer, to try and formulate what this performance can be. I'm also working on this particular piece with Emily Earl. Emily is an extraordinary violinist, and probably my real intention of trying to work with a violin player was because often the sounds I hear are so closely linked to the sound that comes from a violin.
My name's Freddie Meyers and I'm the composer for Deluge. I'm a white man, I'm 23 years old and I have short hair and a medium-length beard that I've been growing over lockdown. Writing the music for Deluge is a really interesting process. Musicians have been writing music about art for centuries. And I think we all come across this problem with the two mediums. Art is about colour and shape and space. Music is about sound, which exists in time. Those two things are sort of fundamentally incompatible. When you're trying to move ideas between art and music. You have to think about what elements you're going to keep and which elements you're going to get rid of. This has been a really interesting process working with Rachel, and I've been working in collaboration with Rachel for the last 2 years, and we've worked together on several performance pieces. What's really interesting about Rachel's practice is that it thinks about art in temporal terms, and thinks about how art can evolve over time. As such, my music also sort of gains a spatial element to it, where I think about how timbre, the sort of tone colour, and how sounds are made up. Think about how that populates space, and how you can use different sounds as a way of sort of imagining spaces. In the Deluge piece, we've done that a lot working with Emily, thinking about how her violin playing can give rise to new and interesting timbres. For example, when we very first started experimenting with ideas, which was back in the very beginning of the year, before lockdown even started, we were thinking about using electronics and layering violins and having sort of multiple different sounds, using air sounds and using sort of quite avant-garde, noisy noises to try and make a sonic space that felt very physical. What's been really interesting working with Siu-Fong and Jeremy and Rachel is that there's 3 different artistic personas that are all part of this piece. And it's sort of my job to bring that together through the music. I mean, on the one hand, my music is trying to translate the ideas, the colours, the shapes into something sonic. But it's also a sort of binding force between 3 artists who are creating work all about exactly the same thing, but that's stylistically quite different.
I'm also very lucky to be working with Australian artist Jeremy Hawkes, and also with Siu-Fong Yeung, who is from Hong Kong and is also a collaborator within this piece. Ultimately, we'll be working also with Stacey Stockwell, who's a sign performer, who's going to also be collaborating with the work so that we can make sure that the work is accessible on every single level. So what is Deluge? Quite often when you're making a piece, you really don't know the full extent of what the piece will be. But for me, when I was writing the narrative for my application, I was very much ensconced in this whole process of being isolated. Almost a year ago, I underwent major surgery, which meant that I spent time in intensive care and then high dependency wards, and finally arrived home to be very isolated for about 4 or 5 months. And just as I was emerging from my isolation and being able to sort of function to some degree again, I received a phone call from the hospital to say, you now have to be isolated. And that was actually in February, before we were really conscious of the full extremes of COVID and what it was going to be. And I also know that I'm going to be in this situation for quite a bit longer. And I have remained isolated throughout that time. Despite the isolations being lifted for some people, it's not been lifted for me. But what it has done has enabled me to actually look inward and actually explore my own practice again. I work as a socially engaged artist. I often work with many different collaborators from different art fields, both here in UK and also around the globe. And it's meant that I'm back on my own and very much thinking about why I make the work I make and what actually interests me. And the whole notions of what I do make work about is human fragility. I explore the human condition. I look at notions of fragility, survival, but ultimately hope. Because if we lose all sense of hope, of course, there's nothing left. What I was proposing for Deluge is that notion of a surge of change and the overwhelming feelings that you experience when you're going through a massive change in your life. And whether that's both a physical change or a psychological change, It's that sense of both fear, excitement, overwhelmment, all those things that you experience. So I hope you enjoy some of the sequences that we put together. It's not necessarily always been easy because we are all in different studios. So we're having to constantly come together at different time bands to try and communicate and express how we want this piece to emerge. This piece is created by a collective. We see ourselves as a collective, and that there isn't any lead voice within the work. So although I'm introducing the work here, I'm by no means the director of the piece, and I'm by no means the person who's making all the choices. And in fact, if I do ever collaborate, that seems to be the way I prefer to work. Partly because I'm only an artist, I'm not a musician, and my main practice is not as a performer. So I really welcome the other people I work with to take on those roles and for them to have the greatest input in that area. So we do all come together as one collective to create this Deluge piece.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Hawkes. I am an artist from Australia. I'm part of the project tackling Deluge. A bit about me, 48 years old, I'm wearing a black hat, glasses, a grey t-shirt, and behind me is a large colourful drawing, which I've been working on today. I was lucky enough to get some funding to work with the amazing Rachel Gadsden. We've been in discussion for all of this year during lockdown and the pandemic, which has been a really wonderful thing to have a new friend and collaborator to talk through ideas, creative practices, share resources, information. And she invited me to be part of this incredible collaboration with herself, musicians and composers Freddie Meyers and Emily, and artists in Hong Kong, Yeung Siu-Fong.
It's been really exciting this year to have the opportunity through a grant award that Jeremy Hawkes received from the Australian Council for the Arts to actually engage in a collaboration with me. And we've had the most thrilling time getting to know each other as artists and to be able to find interesting ways for us to build a collaboration and to be able to express both our individual and shared interests through the work that we make.
I've been tackling this idea of Deluge in a number of different ways with these large-scale drawings, which are very bodily centric, and exploring what it's like to live as an artist with a disability in lockdown. I've also been working on a stop motion animation, frame by frame drawing, which is quite a task, which I didn't realize when I undertook it. And that's in response to a short performance piece provided by Siu-Fong.
Hello, my name is Siu-Fong Yeung from Hong Kong. I am a multimedia artist, and I have always been interested in the relationship between body and soul, which has a charm that attracts me. The works I create are usually based on my interpretation of body and soul, and this has been the general direction of my artistic practice.
In 2019, I had the opportunity to go to Hong Kong to work with Arts and Disability Association Hong Kong and to work with both mainstream and disabled artists on a learning exchange of cultures, exchange of disability notions, but to also work with 8 disabled artists. One of the artists that I met was Siu-Fong Yeung. Siu-Fong is an exceptional artist. She thinks very deeply about the work she makes. And as a disabled person, she's found a very unique way of creating a huge vision through the performance and visual art that she makes. And it seemed really relevant when I was thinking about Deluge to invite Siu-Fong to become part of our collective. Her sense of physical being has a huge impact on how she experiences every day. And both artistically and psychologically, it creates a huge power in the work that she wishes to express, to share, and has a massive psychological quality to it. We've all spoken a lot during our isolation about how we feel being stuck in these enclosed spaces, and often the lack of human contact, the lack of touch, the lack of being able to just be with people. But in the sense that Siu-Fong makes her work, what unfolds is this absolutely beautiful quality of explaining those notions. And it's been an absolute joy to experience spending time and Zooms with Siu-Fong. We wouldn't be able to do this without the incredible support that we've had from ADA-HK. We work with 2 translators, and we have the most fun time just exploring our different cultural identities through these Zoom sessions. There's a whole group of us that are all chatting together. And Siu-Fong is by far the coolest of all of us. She's just got the most incredible sense of humor and ability to be able to communicate. And we've all learnt so much from her work, and it gives me real joy to introduce Siu-Fong to both the UK disability arts world, but really to all of you.
Hello, I'm Winky.
Hello, I'm Cadence. We're from the Arts Education team of the Arts with the Disabled Association Hong Kong, one of the supporting organizations in this daily project.
ADA-HK believes that everyone has the potential for artistic creation, and that every individual has the right to appreciate art. Through our mission, Arts Are for Everyone, we are committed to promoting equal opportunity among people with disabilities, allowing them to have equal access to and excel in the arts, and to advocating an inclusive society through the arts.
In this collaboration, we assist in the Chinese-English translation to enhance communications and the idea-sharing process between the artists. We're glad to see everyone involved being creative and positive despite all the challenges we face. It's truly our honor to be part of this international collective.
Hello, my name's Emily Earl. I'm a 25-year-old white woman with long ginger hair, and I'm sitting in the corner of my living room with my violin. The piece that you've been hearing is a graphic score which Rachel created for me. I watched the video several times thinking about the different sounds that I can create with violin, which would represent the hand movements and different motions and textures on the paper. And after some short experiments, I started to work just with each line of her drawing. And my plan had been to just do each line thinking about how I could translate those little movements into the violin. But as we went on, I got very taken with what she was doing and eventually improvised the rest of the piece just using various different sounds. When we think about motion, you can imagine somewhere silent, and if you see a person moving, there are certain sounds that you can imagine in your mind, and those can be reflected quite effectively on the violin. Things like swaying can be quite, or frantic motions. And as I just did, that can be done with my hand or with the bow. And Freddie and I have been exploring these different techniques throughout the process whilst we've been creating Deluge. And our initial process involved taking those short techniques, recording them separately, and layering them up into one track. So it was quite nice when Rachel sent through this graphic score that I could actually just perform something in its entirety, not as sort of separate things, but as one whole. It's been interesting seeing the different art from Rachel, Jeremy and Siu-Fong, and thinking about motion and how each of their artworks convey this so differently, and the ways in which Freddie and I can create different compositions for each of the artists and then bring them together in one piece.
One of the things that's really interesting is that Jeremy and I actually make really similar work. It doesn't look similar, but actually what propels us to make the work is really similar. It comes out of our sense of being, our sense of humanness. You're only making work that really comes out of who you are. You never feel your arm until you break it. But if you do have something that is part of your human substance and that it has a huge effect on your daily life, it is also going to end up being within the work as well. And so I tend to look at the body as a whole. And what's really interesting about Jeremy's work is that not only does he look at the extent of the human body, but he also moves right into the minutiae of the body. And you get this real sense of viscerality through the work he makes. This is incredibly relevant now as we think very much about antibodies, we think about viruses, we're thinking about all those things that are having such a huge impact on our daily lives. And so we've been having great fun weekly, or sometimes more than that, coming together to discuss the work that we're trying to make as both individuals, but also as collaborators for shows that we're going to be doing next year, but also in this piece that we're making for the Deluge performance piece. I'm really pleased to be collaborating with Jeremy. It's probably been the biggest highlight of my year so far. I've found that one artist that I feel makes work in the same way that I do, but he just happens to be on the other side of the world. But this pandemic situation has meant that we've grown really close and that we are actually working completely in collaboration.
I've also been working with what I'm calling sort of imagined viruses. These are really sort of small, intimate pen and ink drawings, which are a response to how I think the virus might look and its various permutations and mutations. And it's based upon the idea put forward through some neurobiologists, Crick and Ramachandra, who talk about contingency as the organizing principle of evolution, meaning that it's how things mutate in response to stimuli that organizes the whole theory and practice of evolution, which I find really interesting, particularly in this day and age, where we sort of say that we can't control these circumstances or situations, we can only control our response to them. So these are sort of like small meditations on imagined viruses. And I eventually did have a look at the coronavirus under a microscope and was surprised to discover, though I don't know why I was surprised, that it's actually very beautiful. And that in itself, it is a life form, and it is neither evil nor good. It is simply there. So I'm looking at a number of different approaches to talk about Deluge, this silent flood.
I'm also working as the video editor for Deluge, and this really gives me a different perspective than I'm normally used to as a composer. I think as a composer you end up in a very dictatorial space where essentially you are telling a performer what to do. As a video editor who is the composer, it's sort of a different role. I'm not just sort of writing the music and then asking people to play it for me. I'm this facilitator of a collaboration, and I think both in the music and in putting together the different elements that the three artists are bringing to this piece, I get this overview. I get to pull together all of the threads, and my main job is to try and build something that's as authentically the three artists as possible.
About a year ago, I found out that I actually have no antibodies, and probably haven't throughout my life. And it's very interesting when you constantly hear in the news that they're trying to find ways of using antibodies to be able to possibly support the process of bringing the COVID-19 virus under some form of control. That I often wonder about, well, where does that leave me? You know, at what point will I be able to come back out into the society and to be part of everyday living, or is this going to be my home forever? But weekly now, I receive human transplants of antibodies. It's a very vigorous, difficult treatment, and does have a huge effect on my physicality. So I spend about half the week feeling 100% and half the week feeling absolutely terrible. But that doesn't worry me. I mean, that's just the part of the process of living with a condition. What's very interesting is the effect it has on the work I make. And as a visual artist, as a fine artist, it's become really critical to the work I make. I'm really conscious that I'm in isolation, but every single day, the reason I'm able to exist and to continue to be able to exist is the fact that I receive these antibodies from people from all over the world, because without those antibodies, my body would fail drastically. So although I'm in isolation, I'm also anything but isolated. And psychologically, it's both an empowering and a disempowering place to be. We have no control in these circumstances. We've all just got to trust the scientists, governments, or whoever has the overriding power to try and fix this situation. And I think that Deluge, if it's trying to do anything, is to explore those notions. the work's complicated. And we know that when we set out to create Deluge, it was possibly going to just be a small piece of work that we would capture something of what we're all experiencing at the moment. But ultimately, as time's gone by, it has sort of grown like a virus. And it's now something that we know is going to live with us for a very long time. At the moment, we're creating in isolation. But ultimately, this is going to be a live performance piece. One day, if we can return out into the open, we do very much hope to create the work as a live piece as well. So what we've tried to do today is to just give you an insight about the process that we're going through. So rarely do we have that opportunity to really gain a feeling of how an artist or a musician or a performer make their work. And we're very lucky that Disability Arts Online have given us the opportunity to have 2 showings of the work in progress. And we'll, in about a month's time, also be showing the work in its fuller form and where we've got to at that moment. So thanks very much for joining us as we create this piece in the early stages of it. It's been a real privilege, and I'm very grateful that Disability Arts Online, Arts and Disabled Association Hong Kong, also to the Australian Council for the Arts, who've been supporting Jeremy and I to have this exceptional collaboration and to give us the opportunity to find a real reason to be making work under these very challenging and difficult circumstances. So I hope you all stay well and safe, and let's all keep making work together.
Hi, Rachel. Hi, and welcome. And thanks to everyone for joining us from Hong Kong and from Australia. It's a real privilege for Disability Arts Online to be doing something internationally like this. And the video was great. The Artists Collective have given us a real insight into a very new kind of way of working. And can you tell us a bit more about the process of bringing the artists together and what the Deluge Collective is working towards?
Well, as you know, I applied to Disability Arts Online for one of the COVID-19 awards that you generously gave. And my initial idea was just sort of thinking, how can I do something while I'm going to be in isolation? And then very quickly, it seemed much more important for me to actually work as a collective as opposed to working just on my own, because I was already in isolation. And then the notion of how was I going to be able to keep in touch with everybody? And obviously I had these relationships that had already been formed. I think it would have been very difficult if I hadn't already met the artists and worked briefly with the artists before. But we sort of decided that we'd come together and work as this collective where all our voices are equal, with all the constraints of what happens with doing work online. And there are many benefits from it, because you have this very intimate relationship with the person you're directly speaking to, as I am with you, Colin, now, although we know lots of people might be listening into us. But also, how could we convey our work to each other? So obviously we've got Dropbox accounts, and we're constantly sending work backwards and forwards, responding, and often sometimes suggesting to each other, could you possibly do this, or could I do that? And we're gradually bringing this body of work, which all sits in Dropbox at the moment. And then ultimately, of course, we're creating this piece together.
And so will it be kind of like an art performance, presentation, animation, sound, as a kind of a single piece? There are so many different elements that have been described in the video, and I'm just sort of trying to get an idea of how they're all going to fit together.
It will definitely be a piece. I think that we imagine that there'll be something you'll be watching, listening to, and there'll be screens that will be coming up and down, from maybe a triptych to a diptych to a single screen, and different elements will direct the viewer through a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
We don't expect there to be any live interaction from, like we've just been doing and explaining about the piece, because that's obviously was done for this purpose, to really introduce the work and introduce the artist. I remember years ago seeing a Solowit, actually no, it wasn't Solowit, another piece, where there were these huge screens in a room, and just sort of going into those screens. But of course, it's not a large screen because we're all dependent on our computer screen or the screen we have. Ultimately, the work has been devised to be a live piece in performance. And the thing that's become really valuable is that now we're going to have all this digital content that can also become part of the performance, rather than it just being a live painted performance piece. It's going to actually have a lot of digital content that we'll have created. We are submitting to different festivals once the festivals become live again. And I have 2 exhibitions next year where, if they can become live, we'll be doing the work as a live performance as well, with the digital elements involved.
Right.
Basically, our dream is to be in one room together.
Right.
That's what we're hoping.
Yeah. It's very hard to know at the moment how things are going to unfold, but I can see that the music element sort of coming into this live in a very dynamic way. I was wondering, because Siu-Fong has brought her performance into this, but is also clearly a very strong visual artist, and Freddie was talking about how he's taken on the role of the editing role for this purpose. And I wondered if there's if there are opportunities here within the collective for crossing art forms and bringing different skills into the mix.
There definitely is. Just going back to Siu-Fong and also Jeremy, you saw the little extract that I did, creating a graphic score. We're all creating graphic scores. So Jeremy's creating one, Siu-Fong's creating one. Obviously, Jeremy with his hands, Siu-Fong with her feet, because she works and draws with her feet. And so we are all mixing the different ways that we work. And also, obviously, Jeremy has become, he's making these really beautiful animation pieces with the viruses. And also Siu-Fong is quite likely at some point to also use digital work. And we've also, we see that to some degree, Freddie's also becoming a visual artist, because he's actually been filming me. He's in isolation, but he's also become part of my bubble. You have these different bubbles when we can be in bubbles. And so he's also becoming very visual within the work that he creates, and setting up cameras and making sure that things work the way that he thinks they should work without me telling him what to do. So I think we're all swapping and interacting our different practices, which is why we think of it as a collective. As you know, Colin, I'm growing a collective. It's not going to be huge, but I imagine having a small group of artists that are based around different parts of the globe, that I feel a very strong connection to their work, to their philosophy, and their the way their work operates on intellectual and academic levels as well. And of course, you're also going to be part of our collective. I'm going to be inviting Amna Ali Hussein from Palestine as well to be part of the collective. And we hope that in time, we'll all be able to share and interact with our different methods of making together.
Wonderful, wonderful. There's been a few comments and questions have come through, and Ruth Henney on Facebook says, "What an incredible project! I was wondering, in terms of collaboration, did one part of the project appear before the other as an initial inspiration? Was all of the visual art created before the music?"
No, it's all been created together. Nothing's come before, and that's been a very key part of the work. And actually, we don't even know yet what the final is going to be, because until that moment comes, we won't know. It's it really I would call it a process piece. It's I mean, obviously, the initial inspiration that I spoke about in the work was to do with drawing together the idea of the pandemic and isolation, and also not necessarily, I don't know whether I'm thinking about so much just about viruses, but this huge surge that the world feels as a shift. It feels sort of almost bigger than the pandemic. It feels, it could be an economic, it's a social shift, it's a political shift.
Jeremy described it very well as the silent flood.
I thought that was fantastic. I think maybe that could be the new name, because I liked it so much for the piece. Maybe it will be at some point.
Yeah, it struck me there's a poem in that.
Well, you're the writer, Colin, so I'm happy for you to think about that one.
Thanks. There's been a few more comments here. Marion Conroe says, "Thanks for a very interesting, amazing artists." And Sua Kufash says, "Very inspirational." Ellie Wright says, "Wow, what a wonderful introduction to Deluge. Congratulations to you all." And Jude Roberts says, "Wow, beautiful and enlightening. Amazing to see how well you've managed to bring this together from all over the world. Big congratulations to you all. Can't wait to see more." It kind of strikes me that, you know, there's something very exciting about this kind of new way of working and the opportunities for collaborating internationally. And I was thinking, well, I mean, I know myself that there are limitations to this kind of digital process of connecting through screens, and I just wondered how you feel about that, and the limitations, but also the opportunities.
You know, there are loads of limitations. There are many, because you can't necessarily have that direct interaction that you might have, you know, in the studio. Although Jeremy and I definitely have a studio situation, but when we haven't yet created that all in the same studio feel through being on online or through internet discussions. But what we have found, the really positive things are that when we're together, we have been able to also express the psychological feelings we feel about this pandemic. And I know that Siu-Fong chatted to us one day, and she's very dependent on gaining a lot of her physical energy from being able to move around space. And being in Hong Kong, she's been very isolated in a tiny space, and she feels extremely claustrophobic at times. And
across through the performance.
And that comes across in the performance. And it's something that she's playing with. We saw the other day the next stage of her work, and it's really very exciting, and really I think represents how we're all feeling. So the positive things are that despite us being so isolated, because all of our medical conditions or disabilities mean that we are isolated, that we have a connection, and that actually I don't feel, from a work point of view, people say, how are you feeling, or a lot of your projects have had to change. I don't feel limited through my work. I might feel limited through some of the things I can't do outside work, but within my work situation, I feel very empowered this year. you know, and it's quite good not having to jump on planes all the time and travel all over the place. It means it's been a complete concentration of making the work, as opposed to all the other things that go alongside working internationally and working with other collaborators and travel and things like that.
There are great advantages to definitely, and being able to cross geographic boundaries, kind of psychologically, that has an enormous kind of impact on the work, and crossing cultural divides. And I just think it's something that lessons that can be learned from this are going to inform the future, really, in whatever happens.
Well, I think as you've shown through the work of Disability Arts Online, I know you and I have known each other for probably now, I don't know, maybe 15 years. It's quite a long time, showing our age. But you know, you've always been online. You've always been generating a lot of your connections through online presentations. And I think for disabled people, you know, with our limitations of our conditions or our dispositions or whoever we are, that actually being able to not have to move around everywhere has huge benefits. And I think actually I almost sometimes feel, and I know lots of other disabled artists and theatre makers around the world have also said this, that all of a sudden we feel the world is catching up with us a little bit, because this is how we've been working for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a huge theatre goer, and my husband and I, Tim and I, go to the theatre a lot. And, you know, we really miss the direct interaction of live performance. And I can understand for theatre makers, this is huge. But we are also watching theatre online, because that's what we have to do. And we are enjoying it. So, you know, there's just this sense that we have to take on board the current circumstances. Yeah,
absolutely. Other question here, Liz Porter, my Liz, she says, what an absolutely fantastic project, beautiful, moving, looking forward to seeing the next stage. And she's asking whether there's kind of talking about access and considering how creative description might possibly be part of the final piece. She was thinking that creative poetic description to explain how the art is revealing itself could be really interesting.
I think you've made a really fantastic point, Liz, and I'm really pleased that you've brought this this actual point up. I mean, obviously you and I both share, we're both sight limited, and often description is a really key part of us being able to enjoy the full aspects of a performance. And I think that there's no doubt that it's going to be there within the sound element and the emotional quality that will come through the sound that the sight limited person will be able to enjoy. But I think the description as yet has not been shown in this work. Luckily, we've got Colin, who's a writer, on board, which helps. But also, you know, the aim very much, Liz, is to embed a full audio description. We're working with Stacey Stockwell, who is a signed performer, and once that layer is also embedded within the audio description, will become very much part of the work as well. So yes, hopefully we're trying to do it all. But not all yet, not all quite yet.
No, one piece at a time. Yeah,
one step at a time.
I mean, I think the fabulous thing about this presentation is the way it exposes process. And you know, it's, as you say, you know, it's quite rare that we get a chance to see an artist's process in progress, as it were. And I think you've given us valuable insight into how artists can work together, how, you know, kind of adapting creatively and kind of thinking through communication online. There's something very exciting about that.
I think we all feel a little bit raw as well, or we feel the process being a bit raw. I mean, for a very long time, I would never ever let anybody inside my studio, And if they ever did come inside my studio, I cleared it up to such a degree that you couldn't see anything other than finished work, because somehow that was the perfectionist in me wanting to say, I don't really want to show what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit like Bacon pretending he never used any photographic imagery to influence his work. And yet, of course, we know that it constantly influenced his work.
Yeah.
And I think I thought, oh, somebody's getting inside my head. And that became something that we've all talked about as practitioners. We feel we are revealing not our secrets, but, you know, when you're revealing work that's not finished, and that makes you feel vulnerable. But that's what we decided to do.
Yeah. I think there's great strength in that vulnerability. It's the art world doesn't expose enough, I think, of an artist's kind of process and the raw creativity of that. I think probably this time is time to bring this to an end, and to thank yourself, Rachel Gadsden, and Freddie Meyers, Emily Earl, Siu-Fong, and Jeremy Hawkes. It's been wonderful to kind of be part of kind of the forming of this collective, and we really look forward to you know, the work being shown in a fuller form. I believe you've that you're showing Deluge as part of the Mayflower 400 in Southampton, and will be part of Thrive Aid on the 3rd of December. So everyone, please do look out for those links to those events. We've pasted a link to feedback forms on our artist presentations on YouTube and Facebook, and we'd appreciate your help by filling those in. And thanks to everyone who's watching here. We've got 2 more online events coming up as we move into Disability History Month and the International Day of Disabled People. We've got a panel discussion with Dada Fest on disability arts and access in the digital age at 2 p.m. on Monday the 30th of November, and a presentation for Explore York on the unlikely history of disability arts with myself and Dave Lupton at 3 p.m. on Wednesday the 2nd of December. So we look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks again to Rachel. It's been a great event.
Thank you very much, Disability Arts Online, for giving us this starting opportunity. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.